Television, as defined by the American Heritage Dictionary, television, the transmission of visual images of moving and stationary objects with accompanying sound as electromagnetic waves and the reconversion of waves into visual images and sound. The word television was coined by Konstantin Persikal, a Russian scientist, in a paper read to the International Electricity Congress at the International World's Fair in Paris on August 25, 1900, in a paper that reviewed the existing electromechanical technologies. The basic concept of television is to convert a visual image to an electronic signal that can be transported over a distance and then converted back to a visual image. Now, on to the history of television. In this presentation, I will cover the following subjects: electromechanical television, electronic television, early television stations, black and white television cameras, black and white television receivers, television sound, transmission of the television signal, colored television receivers, high-definition television, what is it? And high-definition television receivers, and then the future with a big fat question mark. Okay, let's get started with electromechanical television. Electromechanical television can be traced back to the discovery of the photoconductivity of the element selenium by Willoughby Smith in 1873. If you hit the element selenium with light waves, it would emit electrons, basically. So selenium was used as the earliest image sensing device for television. In 1884, Paul Nipkow used the photoconductivity property of selenium when he invented a scanning disk system to capture and transmit video images. Now, this is the Nipkow mechanical scanning system. As the light from the image passes through each hole of the scanning disk, a scan line is produced. The selenium cells convert the optical image into an electrical signal. The electrical signal in the reverse process is converted to an optical image on a display screen. Simple. However, it was not until 1907 that developments in amplification tube technology by Lee DeForest and others made electromechanical design practical. Now, this was the DeForest vacuum tube. What he did was add a control grid to the Fleming valve, which you were able to modulate the electrical waves. In 1909, in Paris, George Reno and A. Fournier gave the first demonstration of an instantaneous transmission of still silhouette images using a rotating mirror drum as the scanner and a matrix of 64 selenium cells as the receiver. In 1911, Boris Rosing and his student Vladimir Zworykin, that's your friend, Mike, created a television system that used a mechanical mirror drum scanner to transmit, in Zworykin's words, very crude images over wires to a cathode ray tube in a receiver. Moving images were not possible because the scanner was not sensitive enough and the selenium cell was very laggy. Now here's a photo of Dr. Zworykin with his photo transmitter. There was much laboratory development in the field of mechanical television between 1911 and 1925. In 1925, John Baird gave the first public demonstration of an electromechanical television system using the Nipkow scanning disk to televise silhouettes in motion. Now, this is the first television screen I was able to find. October 2nd, 1925. The scan rate was 12.5 pictures per second. As against now, we have 60 pictures per second. The next slide is a diagram of the Baird electromechanical television system. And don't worry, I won't ask questions. You just take a minute to look at this, and you can see the basic pickup areas here with what went with it, and then they transmitted it over the air to a receiver with a mirror image of that. And of course, you had a microphone with a normal transmission facilities back to receiver. And this, as you can see, was on 1928 where they wrote about this. And this is an early electromechanical camera, 1925, and that's John Baird there. An early television camera. An arc lamp is situated at the right. A system of lenses and a rotating perforated disc. And a rotating perforated disc and produce a scanning point of light on the subject. The three objects facing the girl are selenium photoelectric cells. That's these devices here. Kind of crude, but it worked. The Baird televisor, 1928, believed to be the first television receiver, a resolution of 30 lines producing 12.5 pictures per second. This is the first broadcast of a television image by television station W2XBS in Van Cortlandt Park, New York. And we all remember Felix the Cat, 60 line image. Now, back in 1932, there was a mechanical TV receiver. It had no picture tube. A flickering neon glow tube illuminated the screen 50,000 times a second. The scanning disc had 60 holes and was operated by a synchronous motor. And that's the back end of it. As you all now know, there was a limited future for mechanical television. By the early 1930s, it was clear that mechanical television could never produce the picture quality required for commercial success. And then the development of electronic television. Electronic television would require electronic methods to capture an image and to display the image with an electronic device. This required the development of an all-electronic photosensitive image sensor, and that was the vacuum tube. The definition of a television pickup tube, a vacuum tube that rapidly scans an optical image and converts it into an electronic signal. And this was the first practical television camera pickup tube that was invented in 1923 by Vladimir Zworykin. Philo Farnsworth demonstrated the first all-electronic image dissector camera tube in 1929. And that's that beast. And this was the camera that Farnsworth built. Of course, it ended up in a housing, circa 1934. Now here's an image. Image iconoscope. Image iconoscopes were used in live cameras until the 1940s, and then to capture film and slide images until the late 1950s. This is an image iconoscope. We use it in ABC when I came on board for film cameras, and then when they graduated to very small Vidicon pickup tubes, they store these up in the attic, and I found a few. So it's traveled with us up and back across the country. Now, the history of television broadcast stations. In January, Third Mental Station in Schenectady, New York, was able to broadcast 48-line images via shortwave as far as Los Angeles. By September, the station was making 4 television broadcasts weekly. The first regularly scheduled television service in the U.S. began on July 2nd, 1928, from an experimental station, W3XK, in Wheaton, Maryland. Through the years, many more stations started television broadcasting. On August 14, 1928, Hugo Gernsback's New York radio station began a regular schedule of live television. On March 29th, RCA began daily experimental broadcasts in New York City over station W2XPS. The 60-line transmission consisted of pictures, signs, and views of persons and objects. And this was the NBC test pattern, which stayed pretty much in this format all the way through until today. From 1929 to 1941, there was a rapid development in television broadcast quality. On May 2nd, 1941, the FCC approved the television engineering standard of 525 lines of vertical resolution, 30 frames per second with interlaced scanning, 60 fields per second, and sound carried by frequency modulation. So now we're coming into the modern era of television. In 1946, there were 3 television stations. Channel 2, which is WCBW, which was later changed to WCBS. Channel 4, at that time, was WABC. They changed it to WNBC. WABC was picked up by the American Broadcasting Company when they came on the air in 1948. And then Channel 5, WABD, and I think it may be a Fox station now, but I didn't think it was relevant to this talk. Now let's go back to the history of television cameras. Through the years, there were many advances in the development of television pickup tubes. Now, after the image iconoscope, these were the tubes used most. The one in the middle here, this 2.5-inch image orthicon, that was in use from the middle 1940s right on through until about 1960 or 60. Later than that, 1970, it was the workhorse of television. As the camera manufacturers were getting a little smarter, they developed a 4-inch image orthicon, which gave you much more sensitivity. And then along the line, our developers were coming up with smaller and smaller pickup tubes. The Plumbicon was used quite extensively for a number of years, and then it was replaced by the Vidicon, which saw its most use in film cameras. Now, these pickup devices had to be built into television cameras. Now, this was in circa 1930s, an RCA camera, and that was using the image iconoscope. BBC camera from 1936, just to give you an idea that development was ongoing in many countries around the world. Now, this 1936, in the German Summer Olympics in Berlin, this was the first live broadcast of any athletic event. Look at the size of that camera and the lens on it. It took 2 men to operate this. Now, RCA kept up with their development, and that iconoscope that I showed you before was used in this camera, circa 1938-39. At the 1939 World's Fair, this was the RCA camera that was used there. Now, this camera was developed by RCA in 1945. I still remember the name of it. It's a TK30. This also was a workhorse of most of the television stations, and this was in use well into the 1960s. This is the